Hi, I'm Naomi Murphy, and this is the Locked Up Living podcast, where we talk with a wide range of people about harsh aspects of institutional life.
We also explore some of the ways to overcome them and to grow and develop. I'm David Jones. So join us every Wednesday morning, 6 o'clock UK time, for a fresh podcast. You know, Naomi and I have had many fascinating conversations whilst doing this podcast, and we're always surprised and pleased by the kind of honesty and thoughtfulness of the people we've talked with. But today's guest comes with something a little bit extra, and he surprises us right from the beginning. Be prepared for a bit of a shock. So in this episode, we're joined by Andrew MacLeod. He's a passionate advocate and lawyer who's dedicated his life to addressing the complex issues surrounding children born of war and the injustices they face. He's got a background in law and a personal journey marked by profound loss. Andrew has transformed his experiences into a powerful mission to help those in need. He's the founder of the organisation Hear Their Cries, which focuses on advocacy, legal support and raising awareness about the plight of these vulnerable children. Andrew's resilience and commitment to finding solutions in the face of adversity shine through in this conversation.
So Andrew, really good to see you today again. Welcome to the podcast, and you look like you've had a bit of a fight over the week.
Yeah, I have. It wasn't that someone punched me in the face. It was that Australia has the highest rate of skin cancer in the world. We say slip, slop, slap now, put on sunscreen and put on a hat and put on a T-shirt. And this whole, story of a healthy tan is just not true. So this is my, wait for it, 63rd basal cell carcinoma or squamous cell carcinoma that's been cut out in my life. So any of your viewers or listeners who are right now able to sunbake or will in the future, please don't. And please wear a T-shirt, please wear a hat. Otherwise, this stuff happens to you.
Gosh, 63, that sounds an incredible amount.
It actually is. And my dad's had 40-odd cut out, including 5 melanomas, but he didn't get his first melanoma until he was 89. And this is all a consequence of what we did as children. It's not what we do as adults or something that we can stop now, although, we shouldn't go running off and burning in the sun because it is a cumulative thing. Health warning to people, please do not tan. Don't do it.
Thank you. David, you looked like you were going to say something.
Well, no, that's a very useful warning to me, because I was in the south of France last week, very happily sitting out in the sun, but thanks for the warning.
No problem.
So Andrew, you're a lawyer by background. How did you end up working for the UN?
Well, when I was in law school, I was going through a bit of an existential crisis that you normally go through when you're 60, not when you're in your early 20s. And the reason I was is my mother had just died of a brain tumour. So I'd nursed her while she died and then was asking all those questions, well, what do you do with life? And a fellow named Michael Tate, who was senator in our federal parliament and also our Minister for Justice, came in to speak to law students about constitutional law. And halfway through, he stopped. And he said, actually, I don't want to talk about constitutional law. I want to talk about having a law degree. And he said, having a law degree doesn't grant you a happy life and a wealthy existence. It imposes upon you an obligation to use your skills for the betterment of other people. And that message just resonated to me. And I said, that's it. I want to use my skills for the betterment of other people. Now, you as a human being, you can work in your local community group, you can work in your city, you can work in your state, you can work in your country, you can work in the world, and all of those are legitimate. Every single one of those is legitimate. But I'm an arrogant SOB. I think I can save the world. Therefore, I have to save the world. And I thought to myself, right, if you really want to make a difference, you've got to go to the worst place in the world and try to make it better. You don't make the world good by working with good people and keeping them good. You make the world better by working with bad people and making them less bad and helping people to see the error of their ways. Or put another way, if you take the poorest person in Australia and you make them the richest person in Australia, you take the top 5% in the world and turn them into the top 1% in the world, who cares? If you really want to make a difference, you've got to go right to the bottom. And how do you go to the bottom? You go to the worst parts in the world, which is conflicts, natural disaster, war, genocide. So I sat in this lecture theatre when Michael Tate gave this speech and I said, that's it. How do I go to the worst place in the world? And the answer is you go and work for the International Committee for the Red Cross or the UN High Commission for Refugees, and you use your skills through that setup. And that's what I decided there and then that I would do. And I remember very clearly in my first European trip post-university, I went to Geneva. And there's a Red Cross museum because the International Committee for the Red Cross is based in Geneva. It's actually a Swiss organisation. And I stood on the balcony of the Red Cross Museum and I said, one day I'm going to work here. And it took me a couple of years to get the job. And I walked and I stood in exactly the same place. And I said, now I am. So I worked for the Red Cross, which is separate from the UN system. I worked for the Red Cross in the 1990s in Yugoslavia, in Rwanda, post-genocide, in the wars of the breakup of Yugoslavia, Kosovo, etc. And then after doing a few years with the Red Cross, I moved across to work for the UN. And I was picked up by the UN High Commission for Refugees to head up their early warning and emergency preparedness section. And that's how I got into the UN. And for young people listening, if there are young people listening to the podcast, when you start to ask, how do you get these jobs? These days, you can write emails and you can apply for jobs online. But back in our day, Naomi and David, before the internet, you actually had to jump on a plane and back yourself and go and knock on a door. And that's what I did. I knocked on door after door after door saying, has someone got a job for me? Until finally someone said, well, we have this. Will you take this job? And I did. So that's how I got there. A desire and a risk and hopping on a plane, backing myself and knocking on doors.
So a lot of determination there to
Yeah.
achieve this. But I suppose the first thing that comes up in my mind is what on earth attracted you to go to these places? Because they're places that, well, I would feel quite scared to be going to the places that you've listed.
Oh, look, there's no downside. No, there's no downside to dying. There's a downside to getting horribly injured. But I'm not a religious person. I don't believe in God. I don't believe in an aftermath. I do believe we turn into dust and blow away in the wind. So in a strange sense, there is no downside to dying. There is a downside to the process, and I'd rather not do it or not for a while. But, if you really want to make a difference, you've got to go to the hard parts in the world. You just have to. But that having been said, some of these hard parts in the world give you great fulfillment and you make fantastic friends. And I have what I call how the heck did I get here moments, but I didn't use the word heck. I used the word beginning in F and rhymes with duck. And, one of them is flying along the line of control with a Pakistan army general zigzagging between India and Pakistan. You're like, how the heck did I get here? Or being on the border between Rwanda and DRC in the late 90s when Rwanda invaded DRC and you see one country invading another country and you scratch your head and you're like, how did a little Australian boy get here? And actually chat to some of the decision makers and become friends with some of the decision makers. And then some of the most bizarre experiences in life, like in Rwanda, right? Everyone thinks genocide, 1990s, yada, yada, yada. But here's a little thing. In Rwanda, when a child is born, the surname, of course, is the surname of the father. The first name is given by the parents. But the middle name is given to a child as voted by the other children in the village. And when you get invited to a naming day of a child, it's a really high honour. You're invited and you watch the children in the village, vote for what's the name of this child. And when you go into this village, many, many, many of the little kids, like 3, 4, 5 years old, hadn't seen white people. And for them, a white person is a person without colour. It's scary. You're like a ghost. And a little kid looks at you and goes, oh, and runs over to their mum and hides behind the legs and peers out behind the legs. Am I safe? Am I safe? There is nothing in the world that makes up for that sort of experience so culturally different from what we were brought up in.
Thank you. But it wasn't all a bed of roses, was it, working for the UN?
Oh, hell
What
no.
concerns did you have when you were doing this work, and how did you realise there was something amiss?
Oh, look, there are lots of concerns I had with working for the UN. When I quit the UN in 2009, I cited 3 reasons. 1, lack of efficiency, lack of effectiveness, lack of desire to be held accountable. 2, a subjective opinion on balance that I think the system is a net harm. So when people say, the UN might be problematic, but the world's better off with it than without it, I'm not sure that's true. And thirdly, and more damningly, the UN's failure to crack down on the pedophilia of its own staff. Now, I actually started hearing whispers about this before I worked for the UN. When I worked for the Red Cross in former Yugoslavia, there were a series of scandals that started to come out called the whistleblower scandals. And that was about UN security staff that were trafficking 14 and 15-year-old girls from Moldova into Bosnia, chaining them up in a nightclub for the exclusive use of UN staff. Now, some of your listeners might go, here we go, right-wing, fruitcake, pizza shop, QAnon, yada, yada. I'm like, no. Google it and Google the movie Whistleblower starring Rachel Weisz, because there's a movie that's been done about this. This is so well known that a movie has been done about it and it's on Netflix. So I started to hear these rumours. I thought it couldn't possibly be true. Then I went across and worked for the UN, and it has head of early warning and emergency preparedness for UNHCR. In the early 2000s, mid-2000s, there was a series of scandals called the food for sex scandals, where, to put it in shorthand, in Liberia and Sierra Leone during the West African Wars, some families were only allowed into refugee camps if they handed over their children or one of their children for sexual favours. So a mother would be confronted, we can let some of your children in, but we need one of them. Now, this is not some external gossip. I was head of early warning and emergency preparedness for the UN High Commission for Refugees. I saw our internal documents. I know what we knew as an organisation, and I even call it we. And you're just like, no one would ever say it this way, but it was accepted as the cost of doing business that a certain amount of abuse would take place. And when people say, whoa, my mind is blown right now, I will say to them this. Every time there is an imbalance of power, abuse takes place. And sex crimes tend not to be crimes of sex. They tend to be crimes of power. Someone asserting their power over somebody else. And generally it is someone who has a huge lack of self-confidence that is trying to make themselves happier by making somebody else miserable. And there is no greater imbalance of power than that between aid worker and aid beneficiary, because the aid worker controls food, water and shelter, and the aid beneficiary needs food, water and shelter now, right now. And I say nowadays that one of the things I wrote in my book, A Life Half Lived, back in 2013, is I said, one day the United Nations will be recognised as the second largest harbour of pedophiles next to only the Catholic Church. I now know I'm wrong. They're bigger. And if people go, whoa, my mind is now blown, I'm like, no. Think about it this way. There are more aid workers in the world than there are Catholic priests, in more countries than the Catholic Church is present in, and controlling food, water and shelter in a greater imbalance than the Catholic priests have. What makes us think that the average aid worker is ethically any better than the average Catholic priest? And when you start to look at this, you go, of course, if the opportunity to offend is higher and the number of people is higher, of course abuse is going to be higher, unless somehow magically the aid world has made themselves any better than the Catholic Church. And guess what? They haven't.
Gosh, that's quite staggering information that you're giving to us there.
I'm glad you say that, Naomi, because when I say this to people, there are 2 thoughts that should come into your mind. The first is, that's disgusting. And the second is, that's logical. Because predators are not stupid people. They're rat cunning. And predators go to where there's prey. And as we're cracking down on the predatory pedophiles in schools and scout halls and hospitals in the developed world, where do the really aggressive predators go now? They go to the developing world. And what's the easiest way to get access to children in the developing world? Answer, join a children's charity. And if people don't believe me, just think, what did Jimmy Savile do? What did Rolf Harris do?
Well, as you were talking, I was also thinking about both David and I have worked in prisons for a very long time, and actually, do you encounter former AIDS workers in prison amongst the population? No, you don't.
Spot on. And I'll tell you why. So there's a series of laws called the extraterritorial child sex tourism legislation. So we know that it's illegal to have sex with a child under the age of whatever the age of consent is in your particular jurisdiction in your country. And most countries will write criminal law that applies to in their country. English criminal law applies in England. Australian criminal law applies in Australia. American criminal law applies in their states. There are certain areas of law that apply to your nationals and your residents anywhere in the world. So if I, as an Australian, have sex with a child under the age of 16 in Sierra Leone, I might have broken Sierra Leone's law, but I've also broken Australia's law, because in Australia it says it's unlawful to have sex with a child under the age of 16 anywhere in the world. United States has similar law, UK does, New Zealand does, etc. It's extraterritorial law. Then it comes to the question, why are there no prosecutions? Let me put it the other way. Is there no offending? Is it plausible? There are 500,000 aid workers in the world today. 300,000 of them are male. About 30,000 of them are expatriates. Is it plausible that none of them are offending? And the answer is no. That's totally implausible. So if some are offending, but no one has been prosecuted, why? Now, the National Crime Agency in the United Kingdom has been warning since 1999 that as we crack down on predatory pedophiles in the developed world, the predators are going to the developing world. They also estimate about 1 in 35 men have pedophilic tendencies. So if you know 100 men, you know 3 men that have pedophilic tendencies. Now, let's talk about pedophilic tendencies for a second. So what is a pedophile? Now, I'm using the word pedophile in the general community's understanding, because the pure psychological definition is a pedophile is someone who has an attraction to prepubescent children. A hebephile is an attraction to pubescent. There's another word that describes early puberty. And then after the age of around about 16, the sexual attraction is considered normal, the pure physical attraction, because after about 16, people are more or less physically fully evolved. That's not mentally evolved, but physically evolved. So 1 in 35 men have an attraction to what we would say under the age of consent, 16, 15, thereabouts, depending on which jurisdiction you're in. Now, having a sexual attraction is not a moral decision. Acting upon your sexual attraction is. So when people say pedophiles are sick, I'm like, no. The danger in calling them sick is you think it can be detected and it can be cured. And pedophilia can neither be detected by a test nor cured. It's a hardwiring in the brain that's just wrong. And if you doubt it, think about it this way. I don't know, Naomi, what you're sexually attracted to, and David, I don't know what you're sexually attracted to, but you're sexually attracted to something. And if you think to yourself for the moment, what am I sexually attracted to? And you have in your mind what that is. And then I ask you the question, why? And you're probably going to say, don't know, I just am. Or as a psychologist explained it to me once, some like tall, some like short, some like fat, some like skinny, some like old, some like young. It's a hardwiring in the brain. It cannot be cured. It cannot be detected. Therefore, there is a greater burden on us to prevent. Now, if you think it can be detected, you think somehow it can be filtered out. It can't be filtered out through human resources processes. So you need to recognize where vulnerabilities are, where abuses are likely to take place, and then you work really hard to prevent and detect and then prosecute. Prosecute not just to punish, but prosecute to become the first step of prevention of future abuses. Because any criminologist will tell you, size of penalty does not deter crime, fear of detection does deter crime. So back to what you said, Naomi and David, you've worked a lot in prisons and you've never seen an aid worker in prison. Flick it the other way around. What is the current fear of detection in the aid industry? Answer, none. And you have vulnerable children and vulnerable populations. And I don't need to say there's a conspiracy of pedophiles bringing everyone into the aid industry. I just need to use that number, 1 in 35. 500,000 aid workers, 300,000 of them are male, 3% of which is 9,000. But the child abuse inquiry in Australia found that 7% of the Catholic clergy participated in pedophilia. So if you then turn around and say, well, where's the aid work, the aid industry? If the general community is about 3% and the Catholic Church is 7%, industries that attract pedophiles are at 7%. Where's the aid industry? Well, I'd say it's halfway between the general community and the Catholic Church. Let's call it 5%. 5% of 300,000 is 15,000. Is it a safe starting assumption? Assumption, not data, because there's no proper data on this. Safe starting assumption, is there somewhere around about 15,000 men with pedophilic tendencies working in the aid industry in an imbalance of power with access to children and controlling food, water and shelter? And the answer is yes. And that should be our baseline. That's how big the problem could be. So therefore, what is the burden upon us to prevent?
Totally shocking, Andrew, I have to say. Like you say, it's not entirely surprising, having seen stories about UN peacekeepers before. But
hang on, Naomi, can I pull you up on this? Because
you can.
I want to draw a distinction between peacekeepers and civilian staff, because there's a real danger to go down the path of peacekeeping. So just to explain to your listeners and viewers, peacekeeping soldiers are soldiers who are sent as part of a UN peacekeeping force after a motion through the Security Council. And it's usually the largest troop providing countries are Pakistan, Central African Republic, Democratic Republic of Congo. And these countries are not sending their soldiers because they're nicer than us. They're sending their soldiers because they get paid a huge amount of money per head from the UN, i.e. from taxpayers like you and me, to pay for these soldiers to go to their country. It's a huge income earner for these countries. Is it any wonder that one of the biggest peacekeeping forces in the world until recently was Central African Republic soldiers in the Democratic Republic of Congo and Democratic Republic of Congo soldiers in the Central African Republic? Has no one understood the level of this scam that's going on? So when people say, are peacekeeping soldiers abusing? The answer is yes. And then what happens is people say, well, why doesn't the UN do anything about it? To which their answer is, well, it's up to the troop-providing countries to discipline their soldiers and they're under immunities and status of forces agreements, yada, 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 yada. And now you're completely lost. But what you're distracted from is not the soldiers, it's the civilian staff. See, the soldiers are largely black, and the abuse largely happens to little black girls. And as a journalist from The Times told me when she asked me, why doesn't this get traction? I said, you're the journalist, you tell me why it doesn't get traction. And she said, this abuse largely happens to little black girls in Africa and people don't care about little black girls in Africa. Now, shocking, but largely true. So most human beings don't want to think about pedophilia and child abuse. It's a very uncomfortable subject. So if they can disengage from the subject, they will. So if they suddenly think, well, this is black peacekeeping soldiers abusing little black girls in Africa, it's not my problem. And this is the way the UN, whenever you talk about sex abuse, will talk about peacekeeping soldiers, and it distracts you down that path. And I turn around and go, no, bring it back. There are more civilian staff than peacekeeping soldiers with better access to children, and most civilian staff look like me, middle-aged white blokes, and we can stop them, but we choose not to. We distract onto peacekeeping soldiers. No. Start with the civilian staff. Start with the people in development settings. Start with people who look like me.
So Andrew, what was it like when you were working in the UN and you started having access to all this information and realising it was, the scope, the extent of the problem?
So I started off by thinking it wouldn't be hard to get people to buy in on the statement, don't rape children. I thought that would be easy to get people to agree to, but no, it's not. You're exaggerating the problem. You're a middle-aged white man. You have no right to participate in this debate. You're projecting your own behaviour. All these accusations have been thrown at me. The truth is it's like the Catholic Church. Cover it up. Shh, don't tell people. There's a big difference between the Catholic Church and the UN. The Catholic Church could always lean back on God and say, you need still to support us, an institution, because we're your gateway into heaven. The UN doesn't have God. And the UN, like the large NGOs, like Oxfam with the Oxfam scandal in Haiti, you know what they're really scared of? They're really scared of people finding this out because they don't control God and they need people's money. So why are they sweeping it under the carpet? Because they don't want people to stop donating. You know, they won't say this is the cost of doing business, but there's a certain amount of sexual exploitation of women and children that is accepted in the aid industry as the cost of doing business. And people say, no, we don't accept, no, we don't accept. And I say, righto, since 1995, since the whistleblower scandal, what have you done to stop it? And the answer is bugger all. And if you've done nothing to stop it, try and tell me you're not accepting this as the cost of doing business. Because you are by your actions, because you haven't stopped it, because as you said, Naomi, and as you said, David, there aren't any aid workers in jail. And they're not in jail because they haven't been detected, they haven't been reported, and they haven't been prosecuted. The most powerful statistic in the world is zero. If there are zero prosecutions, it's not because there aren't zero offenders. It's because there's zero attempt to stop it.
Yeah, it's utterly atrocious. A hard conversation to be having, Andrew, I'm afraid. What happened when you tried to speak up?
So at first you get the platitudes. Oh, yes, we have zero tolerance for sexual exploitation, abuse, and yes, we've got to do something about it, yada, yada, yada. My last posting for the UN was in the Philippines. And the Philippines is a destination country for sex tourism in and out of the aid industry. And when I reported to my boss reported it to New York, and then she was fired for being racist. And I'll tell you, there wasn't a racist bone in her body. She was removed sideways because she raised a difficult issue that I raised with her. And the UN is littered with stories of whistleblowers being fired when they've tried to raise this issue. 1995 whistleblower scandal turned into a movie. This is 30 years ago. The last interview the Secretary General Kofi Annan did as Secretary General was with Lise Doucette at the BBC, a wonderful journalist. And Lise asked him, Secretary General, you've been saying for 3 years, zero tolerance, and nothing has changed. That interview was 20 years ago, and nothing has changed. And it's really frustrating that you start Googling this, you find the whistleblowers almost always are fired. That's why the movie starring Rachel Weisz is called Whistleblower. Mm-hmm. It's not called Hero. It's not called I Caught the Bad Guy. It's called Whistleblower, because who has never worked again in their life? The person who abused the women and children or the whistleblower? The truth is the whistleblower never worked a day in their life. So I had an existential crisis in 2009. I was senior enough in the UN system to realise I tried from the inside to fix it. And there's an old expression in Australia, I don't know if it translates well to your listeners. It's, are you better to be inside the tent pissing out or outside the tent pissing in? And I was inside the tent pissing out and it didn't work. So I had the choice. They offered me a promotion to New York. I could either be promoted, put on the golden handcuffs and not ever look in the mirror again, or quit, walk out and go, I cannot stomach this. So I quit. And together with 3 other whistleblowers of the UN, we created Hear Their Cries, hearing the cries of whistleblowers and hearing the cries of victims. And we put the whistleblowers first because it's the whistleblowers that can really protect the victims on a large scale. If only we listen to the people who've been there, who've seen it, and have fought the bureaucracy, have fought the risk to themselves of the great UN pension system and the great UN salary, and you'd be able to say to all your friends around a barbecue, aren't I a great hero because I work in the aid industry? Absolute balderdash. You work in an organisation that doesn't work, and at its worst, it abuses women and children, and it shouldn't be hard to buy in on the statement, don't rape children, but it bloody well is. And you can see how angry I get at this. And this is after 30 years of advocating for it.
Andrew, you come across as being a very active person, and I guess you have to be, given the experiences you've had and the life you've led. We should be very grateful for that. Now, I'm somebody who's pretty much always believed that anything is corruptible and will be corrupted, but I find that even so, I'm shocked by what you're describing, really.
Well, what I say to people, David, is don't be shocked and don't believe a word I say. Google it, verify it, check it. Because some of your listeners will be going, is he crazy? Well, check it. Google the following phrases: whistleblower scandal Bosnia 1995. Google food for sex scandal West Africa. Google Oxfam scandal. Google WHO abuse of women and children during Ebola. Think about this. In Eastern Congo, during the Ebola crisis, Ebola, a very, very deadly disease passed through bodily fluids. And WHO staff felt so much impunity that they would even abuse women and children in that circumstance. See, the thing is, the feeling of impunity that these abusers have, I'll never get caught, and even if I do, it'll be by some dodgy police force in some dodgy country, and I only need to give the copper $10 and I'm out of it. And that's why there are no aid workers in jail. It's not because there's no abuse. It's there's almost no detection. And in the rare occasion someone gets detected, most of the time they pay their way out of it, or the institution just covers it up. Like, think about the Oxfam scandal. Many of your listeners or viewers will remember the Oxfam scandal 10 years or so ago, when Oxfam staff were caught passing women and girls around in Haiti. Now, that came out about 10 years ago, but the scandal was nearly 10 years old when it came out. And the global head of Oxfam wasn't a white man. The global head of Oxfam was a female. And when asked, why didn't you report this to the Haitian police? Her answer was, well, we didn't think they'd do anything. Even a white woman seeing the abuse of women and girls by men protected her institution before she protected the women and children. And you can be angry at the perpetrators, and you should be, but they've got a hard wiring in the brain that's wrong. It's not a moral decision to have the attraction, it's a moral decision to act upon the attraction. But the female head of Oxfam doesn't have this hardwiring excuse. She's decided as a female that it's worth protecting the institution's bank account over protecting the women and children. Actually, who's the worst person? The perpetrator or the person that enabled the perpetrator?
You're posing it as a question. I would say they're both culpable.
They're both culpable. Who's worse? Who's worse? The person who can't control the thought in their brain, and let's be clear, they're wrong and they're evil, or the person in the cold, hard light of day who makes a commercial decision. It's like the greatest mechanism to connect predator and prey these days is social media, Facebook, Roblox, and others. Facebook has the ability through AI algorithms to detect the network of predators and prey in a squintillionth of a second, and it chooses not to for commercial reasons. I have the view that Mark Zuckerberg should go to jail. And let me justify that statement. So we've done a whole lot of work when I say we, Hear Their Cries, plus a whole lot of scientists at King's College and the law firm I used to chair, because we recognise that people are trying to sweep this under the carpet. So how do you create data on the scale of the problem that people can't deny? Now, when women and children are abused, there is a subset of these victims that get pregnant. Now, most don't. But if you're between the age of puberty and menopause and the man didn't wear a condom and you were fertile at the time, you might get pregnant. When the child is born, the child has 50% the mother's DNA and 50% the father's DNA. So I came up with this idea where, okay, if a child has been born of abuse, with the right consent and the ethical protections, take the DNA of the child, isolate the father's side of the DNA, put that on 23andMe, Ancestry.com, all the commercial databases, and map out the extended paternal family. And then you triangulate backwards. And in about 70% of the cases, you can identify who the father is by the paternal DNA in the child. And we've done a series of experiments in the Philippines. We took 37 DNA samples from children born of sex abuse in the sex slums in Angeles City, north of Manila. And out of 37 DNA tests, we found 34 fathers. And then we took 20 DNA samples around a British Army base in Nanyuki in Kenya. This army base has been there from the colonial days, 80, 90 years. And strangely enough, where you've got military and rich military in a poor country, there's a lot of mixed race kids running around the outside. So we took 20 sample DNA tests, and out of 20 DNA tests, we found 17 fathers, all of them British soldiers. The youngest child we took DNA from was 1. The oldest child we took DNA from was 68. And this 68-year-old man had lived his entire life asking the question, who am I? Who is my father? Do I have a brother? Do I have a sister? And some people say to me, well, the mother consented to this. Why should the father have to pay? I'm like, no, this is not about the mother's rights. This is about the children. The child consented to nothing. The child didn't consent to living their whole life not knowing who their father was. The child did not consent to not knowing if they ever had a brother or a sister. The child did not consent to living their whole life with the right of a nationality other than the one they had and not taking. And what we hope with this technology is we start to show the huge scale of the problem by sex tourists, by soldiers, by UN staff and by NGO staff. And the message that I would have to anyone who works for the UN, this technology will expand and grow and it will show the scale of the problem. And if you're an abuser, we'll catch you one day. And if you were someone who just enabled the abuse or turned a blind eye to the abuse, when this gets bigger over the next 10, 15, 20 years, what do you do when your granddaughter says to you, Grandpa, what did you do to stop it? And your answer is nothing. That will be your legacy. And I'm going to create that legacy because we've got to hold these people to account. Size of penalty doesn't deter crime, fear of detection. As this technology expands, if you're fathered a child, fear of detection over the next generation or two is certain. You might die. It might be in 30 years' time that your grandchild finds that they have a cousin over in Kenya, and they can only make sense with that when they figure out you were an abuser. That's what this technology will do.
Andrew, that is a fascinating account really of the work that you've been doing since you've got onto this subject, do you want to tell us a bit about the organisation and what you've set up and where it's linked?
So Hear Their Cries was set up by myself and 3 other whistleblowers from the UN, and it was about creating the advocacy for reducing the abuse of women and children by UN and aid worker staff. And we're constantly confronted with a number of accusations. You're exaggerating the problem, you're a part of a secret right-wing conspiracy to destroy foreign aid, and you have no academically defensible data. Now, we are not part of a right-wing conspiracy. We're not trying to destroy foreign aid. We're actually trying to fix it. But do we have academically defensible data? Answer, no. And is that our fault? Or is that the whole industry that's known about this problem for 30 or 40 years, but has chosen not to have the academically defensible data? So we're sitting back and we're going, how do we get the academically defensible data, knowing whatever data we come up with, people are going to challenge? DNA. You want to challenge it? Fine. I'll give you a child and a father, and if you don't believe me, do the test again. If you didn't like the lab, do the test again. If you didn't like the process, do the test again. Because guess what? The test is going to say the same thing over and over again. And the turning point for us was just before COVID, there was a case in California called the Golden State Killer case, where a guy had wandered around California in the late 70s, early 80s, and raped and murdered quite a number of women. Never caught. And I think it was 2017 or 18, a cold case investigator opened the file, found DNA from the crime scene, put the DNA on the national database, nothing came back. He then thought laterally and put a profile for the DNA on the commercial DNA databases and mapped out an extended lot of relatives to this crime scene DNA, which was 100% the perpetrator. And they triangulated backwards and said, this crime scene DNA with this range of extended relatives can only be one of these 10 human beings. Remove the females out of it because females are not raping. It has to be one of these 5 people. And they followed those 5 people around and picked up DNA from a discarded cigarette butt, Starbucks cup, and DNA extracted from the fingerprints on the back of a door handle of a car. And they ended up getting him. He went to trial. He's now in jail. Now, for your listeners, to explain how this works more clearly, one of the children we're helping in the Philippines, we took her DNA and we put it on the commercial databases, and we got a 25% match with a guy named John. As a 25% match, John can only be the uncle or the half-brother. They're the only genetic explanations of what is the biological relationship between this child and this person. Given that the child was 10 and John was in his 50s, he's not a half-brother. He's going to be the uncle. That is the only explanation. So therefore, the brother or one of the brothers of John has to be the father of the child, M. So we look at John's Facebook and we find he's got 2 brothers, Peter and Paul. There is no evidence that Peter had ever been to the Philippines. But on Paul's Facebook, there's Philippines all over it, including the city where M was born, including posing with a whole lot of prostitutes in spas and saunas. It's like, we've got you. And then we go to the court and we say, here's the evidence that we have. He's likely to be the father. We don't have to prove 99.9% he's the father. We prove on balance of probabilities he's more likely than not to be the father. The court can then suggest but not order a DNA test. And if the man refuses, the court draws a negative inference from the refusal and declares him the father anyway. So if you're not the father, do the DNA test. And if you don't do the DNA test, you're going to be declared the father. So that's how the genealogy works. And the closer the match with the child, the easier it is to find the father. The further the match, the harder it is. And I put my DNA up on these commercial databases, and I have a secret. And my secret is my 4th cousin, once removed, through his mother, Mary Ann MacLeod, is Donald J. Trump. And that's 4th cousin, once removed, that I say is not removed enough.
Are you sure you want to tell everyone about that?
Too late. But the important thing to say for people is this genetics unrolls and this genealogy unrolls. Nobody Nobody has no secret or skeleton in their closet if you go back 2 generations. There are mysteries, there's incest, there's rape, there's abuse, there's unknown parentage. You only need to go back everyone's family tree 2 generations and you'll find something. Now, I say that because people should not be ashamed of what's in the background of their family tree, because the truth is powerful. And by giving people the truth, you give people identity. I'll tell you one more story about a child B. She's now 18. She was 14 when we took her DNA. She has a very strong dimple on her chin. She's a good student. She's a lovely kid, but she's very introverted and she sits over, a little hunched. When we found her father, and he's a piece of shit. When we found her father, he had a very strong dimple on his chin, and I showed her the photo and she rubbed the dimple on her chin and she sat upright. She went, that's where I get it from. And this whole weight lifted off her shoulder. And when I started this work, I thought it was about getting child support orders, passports, nationalities, this sort of stuff. Well, what I realized is you're actually giving people identity. I now know who my father is. I now know where I come from. And this is an incredibly powerful liberation for people. And that's why this work will continue, because regardless of whether procreation was criminal or not criminal, whether it was abusive or not abusive, it doesn't matter. If a child doesn't know who both of their parents are, they have every right to know who their parents are, and we must empower them in following that right.
Yeah, you're touching on something really deeply psychological, aren't you, in terms of people's need to know where they've come from, even if that's not a good story.
There's an organisation in Norway called Children Born of War, and it's still finding the genetic heritage of people born in World War II. So there's a whole lot of 90-year-olds who are saying the last thing I want to do before I die is find out who I am. And it's incredibly powerful.
Thank you, Andrew. Now, a number of times you mentioned we and us, and I found myself wondering who these other people were. You don't need to give me their names, but were these just friends or associates, or what's this group that you're referring to?
So what I've managed to stitch together is 3 core areas. Hear Their Cries is me and 3 others, and we do the media advocacy. Then there is the science around this. And the science around this came from the Golden State Killer case and the Begum case, the ISIS bride case. And you'll remember when the ISIS bride case came up, most of the media in Britain didn't have any sympathy for Begum, but had sympathy for the unborn child because the unborn child was British, which made me read the Immigration Act. Why is the unborn child British? And if you descend from a British national parent with certain circumstances, you are, as a matter of right, as a matter of birth, British. So if a British man goes overseas and abuses a woman or a child and she gets pregnant, that resulting child is British as of right, as a birth. So I went to Leicester University and I said, they were the first people to map the human genome. Do you think we could take children born of abuse, identify their DNA, put them through the same process as the Golden State Killer, identify the father, and if the father is British, we get them British nationality? And Leicester University said, holy heck, no one's ever thought about that. Yes, it will work, but you need a certain branch of genetics called genetic genealogy. I said, who's the best in the world at that? And they said, Denise Sindercrome Court, a professor at King's College London. And I was already a professor at King's College London. So I went and saw Denise and I said, do you reckon we can do this? And she said, yes. No one's ever thought of that, but yes. So I connected Hear Their Cries together with King's College. But you can do the advocacy and you can find the genetics and you can find the child, but who's then going to get that child the rights? And the answer is a lawyer. So I just happen to be the chairman of a law firm as well, but you need a lawyer in the jurisdiction where the father is, because you're trying to hold the father to account by his jurisdiction. So I need to build a network of lawyers where the fathers are, US, UK, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, etc. But these are kids that have no money. So it's got to be lawyers who are prepared to work for free. And I'm not very good at asking people for money, but I'm very good at asking people to work for free for a good cause. So the we is Hear Their Cries doing the advocacy, King's College doing the science, and a network of pro bono lawyers doing the legal work for free.
Thank you. That's really helpful in putting us in the picture, I think. Andrew, you come across as being someone who's pretty resilient, but many of the whistleblowers we've spoken to have been emotionally impacted by the retaliation that they've experienced. How have you, what's been the effect upon your psychological well-being?
Oh, look, it's been hard. And let me say two things. Firstly, I used to be a competitive swimmer. And when you hop in the lane at 5:30 in the morning and you start your first lap we've got 3 to 6 Ks coming, and it hurts. And you know, guess what? It's going to end. It's going to end. Just get through it. When it ends, you're going to feel a lot better for it. So put up with the pain, get through it. It's going to end, and you're going to feel better for it. So that's always my makeup. You know, you face something horrible, it's going to end. However, the last few years when we've been working with children in the Philippines taking their DNA and in Kenya is many of these children themselves have been abused. And working in the spectrum of child abuse from a child's perspective, from the victim's perspective, is really hard. And as a middle-aged white man, to confront what middle-aged white men are doing is harsh. And I'm not a woke lefty activist, and I usually bristle at phrases like intergenerational trauma and yada, yada, yada. And when you work with these kids, you see it's real. And there's no bigger intergenerational trauma than not knowing who your father is and finding your father's actually a dirtbag. You know, Child B said to me once, all I want is my father to give me a hug. And I had to say to her, he never will. He never will. And it's really hard work. But you know you're playing a little role in making someone else's life better. And whatever hardship I face with that is nothing compared to what the kids are facing. So you just buckle down and you go, it will end. We'll get to the end of the 3K. And at the end of the 3K, life is much better because you've helped somebody else.
Thank you. I mean, one can see through talking with you that underneath the energy and the resilience, there's still some severe issues going on in your mind, and that's surprising.
Because it's really easy to look at data and go, X number of abuses, X number of men have got pedophilic tendencies, yada, yada, yada. But when it has a face and a name, you know, one of the kids called me up once. We're trying to find her father, but because her mum was also in the sex industry, her mother attempted to sell her. At the age of 11, her mother was negotiating her virginity price with a guy in Germany and Holland who now have free accommodation, according to the governments of Germany and Holland. When a little girl calls you up and says, I don't want to be a prostitute, get me out of here. What do? You've got to get him out of there. And then you go, right, I've helped 1, 2, 30, 40. And, you know, there are hundreds of thousands in that position. And then the most frustrating thing becomes, who are the biggest blockers of this work? It's not the perpetrators. It's not the middle-aged white men. They know they're guilty and they're scared of me. You know who the biggest blockers of this work are? People who describe themselves this way on their own websites. Academic feminists fighting for the rights of children. And there's a certain branch of feminism which is called misanderistic feminism. And that's feminism not driven by the protection of women and children. It's feminism driven by the hatred of men. And these are people who have made their careers talking about how bad men are. The last thing they want is the problem they've been talking about to be solved, because their whole career has been made on talking about a problem. And even worse, if the problem they've been talking about has been solved by a man, that's even worse. And if people doubt that, think about this. There's the phrase we've all heard about, which is violence against women. And if you use the phrase violence against women, you subconsciously blame the women for women should change their behaviour. They shouldn't wear a short skirt. They shouldn't go out at night. And when talking about violence against women, the audience tends to be women because you've dressed it up in feminist terminology. It's a women's issue about women for women. And I challenge that and I say, let's phrase it slightly differently. It's not violence against women. It's violence by men. And if you call it violence by men, suddenly you realise whose behaviour needs to change. Is it women or men? Answer, men. Where does this discussion need to take place? In amongst groups of women or amongst groups of men? Groups of men. And it's men who need to change the behaviour of other men. And that doesn't happen when you have a feminist academic talking to an audience of people that's 95% female. You know, and I raise that and I get chastised for being sexist. And it's like, no. I'm wanting to solve the same problem that you're wanting to solve. But I focus on the perpetrator. And they say, no, you've got to take a victim-centric approach. And I'm like, no, the problem with taking a victim-centric approach is, what do you need? The first thing you need to take a victim-centric approach is you need a victim. And I'm like, no. Stop the victim happening in the first place by stopping the perpetrator in the first place. And it's bizarre that the greatest objectives to my work are not men, it's women. And it's that certain branch of feminism, that misanthropistic feminism. And it's so many things in this work that frustrate the bejesus out of me. It's the women in charge of Oxfam that covered it up. It's the misanthropistic feminists who try to attack the messenger, not the message.
Here you've coped with a lot, Andrew, and obviously we could see how painful the work is, and presumably it's that sense of knowing that you can make a difference that keeps you enduring it, even though it's so painful. I was struck by, not when you were talking about the impact on children in terms of identity, having encountered people who know that they are the product of rape, that actually those children are often also vulnerable to further abuse, aren't they? Because there's the mother's pain at what's happened to them then can also get in the way of ensuring that the child is raised in a loving environment.
So you, being in Britain, might be aware of what's now known as Daisy's Law, Daisy Stone, an amazing woman. Daisy was adopted at birth. All of what I'm about to say is public knowledge. Daisy was adopted at birth. When she became of age, she got her adoption file and she found that her birth mother was 13 and her birth father was in his 30s. It was statutory rape, but the father wasn't prosecuted and Daisy was adopted out. She went to the police and said, why didn't you prosecute my father? And they said, you're not the victim. Privacy laws, none of your business. She's come to me. She did a lot of advocacy. So I'm underestimating just how much work she's done. She's an incredible woman. She came to me and she said, what do you think? And I said, well, what does your birth mother say? And she said to me initially, my birth mother doesn't want to prosecute it. And I'm like, look, I accept that you as a child born of rape are a victim of rape as well, but you're the secondary victim of rape. The primary victim of rape is the mother. So if your mother doesn't want to prosecute this, don't. She came to me a few weeks later. I've spoken to my birth mother. She now wants to prosecute. I'm like, okay, go off to the police, ask them why they didn't prosecute, and they will say, oh, look, it's old, it's dusty, the evidence has gone cold, yada, yada, yada. So just pass over my card and say, Professor Andrew MacLeod will take a private criminal prosecution on our behalf if you don't prosecute. And what will happen, and the first thing he will do is subpoena all your internal documents about why you didn't prosecute in the first place. And I said, and what they will do is they will then prosecute, which they did. And Daisy's birth father was convicted for a number of years in jail. But she didn't stop there, because she's a courageous and a wonderful woman. She said she wanted children born of rape to be accepted in law as victims of rape as well, and therefore rights to the information about their procreation. And courageously, she battled for years, and finally she got Daisy's law up in the UK, and in the United Kingdom, children born of rape are now accepted legally as victims of rape. And it's an incredibly powerful law that Daisy has done to bring that into place. I have so much admiration for her.
Oh, that sounds pretty impressive. I've not even heard of that law, actually.
Google it. Google Daisy's. Yeah.
Quite a few
Google
people
Daisy's law.
But Andrew, we can see how painful the work is. It's obviously consumed your whole life, actually, in terms of it being very focused on, having the energy to pull these three branches of work together. How have you coped with all of this dark, painful material that you're steeped in? What have you done to maintain your own health and well-being to be able to keep doing the work you're doing?
I have very good friends. I have very good friends who help with the tears. And there's no alternative anyway. How do you walk away from this? You can't. You've got to create something that grows and grows without you. My main focus now is trying to find the next generation who will take this work on. There's a thing in commerce called founder's syndrome, that the greatest vulnerability for a successful company is when the CEO who founded the company should move on. And often they don't, and often it fails because they lose sight of how it grows. And I don't want this idea to suffer from founder's syndrome. So I perceive my job now is to find the next generation to take the idea on to grow, so I can begin what I call the slow drift into obscurity and being happy about it. That's what I want to do now.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. It's been wonderful, albeit somewhat challenging to have this conversation with you today, but we're very grateful to be able to meet with you in this way.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you for doing the work that you're doing in the first place, actually, but also for coming on and sharing this information, because it is a story that people really need to know about.
Look, the last thing I'll say to your listeners and your viewers is this. When you're confronted with some dark stuff, you can either focus on the dark stuff, or you can look through it and find the light on the other side and say, right, how do we build out of this? How do we move on? How do we solve the problem? And I say to people, when you're confronted by a problem, it's not a problem. It's just another opportunity to find a solution. And that's all you do. Okay, here's a problem. Awesome. I have another opportunity to find a solution.